I come from the UK. I work for a charity called AbilityNet. We have a number of banks as customers. We do digital accessibility work with them. We've worked with HSBC, who I know spoke last year about their accessibility work in banking. And I think one of the things to remember with financial services is it's such a fundamental part of independent living. So we work with people with all disabilities, all types of technologies, in all areas of their life, in education, in work, and home life. But I feel like financial services is such an important part of living a full life and living an independent life that it's like almost the number one thing you want to get right. And when it goes wrong, it sort of creates some of the biggest problems that it can create in your life. That's true of anybody, not just disabled people. Everybody faces those challenges every day in just doing the stuff with the money that they want to do. So I think this is a really, really powerful session that we're going to go through. There's a couple of things that I think you're going to hear. So I want to just tee that up a little bit so you can understand what we're doing in structure, if you like. I think what we're going to hear first is from some people with disabilities about their experience of banking, because that's why we've got to get this right. The why this is important. And part of the why is that banks are missing the opportunity to have these people as customers. So I'm a marketing person, so I'm interested in the business benefits of any of these ideas. And if somebody can't bank with you, then they can't be your customer. That's it, simple. And I know that Marley, who was here from HSBC last year, said, if you don't want their custom, send them to HSBC. We'll look after them. We're good at accessibility. If there's a bank that needs looking after, we'll look after them. So it's a competitive thing for banks. It needs to be seen as something that if you're not speaking to these customers we're going to hear from, if they can't use your services, they're probably going to go elsewhere. So I think that's a really important thing to start with right at the beginning, is why would a bank take this seriously? It's because it's really important for them to compete with other banks. That's probably the number one thing that they wake up in the morning thinking about. So have a think about that from the beginning. If you're a customer of a bank, what do you think about banking with that bank? And then the second thing then, and Christine here is here to talk a little bit more about the how. What are banks doing? How do banks address this? What are the challenges? What are they doing now to really think about the needs of customers? Because there's loads of good work going on. And then as we go a bit further, we'll be looking at what we can do more of. So we'll hear what the banks are doing now. We'll hear more about what many banks are doing. But what can we do more of, and how can the community work together? How do we work together to enable this change to come? Not just the banks on their own, but customers and organizations and non-profits and organizations like mine that works with HSBC. And then finally, Pina here comes from the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. They have a maturity model. And a maturity model is a way of thinking about how you do things. So it doesn't measure what you do, it measures how you do it. How well are you delivering accessibility within your organization? Because one of the challenges that we'll talk about is it's not always clear who accessibility belongs to. It doesn't really fit neatly into one part of the organization and just stay there. Very often it has an implication across the whole organization. So that's one of the challenges. If you're trying to do this from within a bank, you know that it's really messy. It's like spaghetti. You can't find people who want to work on this. So we'll talk about those challenges because that's actually the only way we're going to make it better. So we'll start with the why. I've got a couple of people I can see who I'm going to ask to talk about that. Then Christine will tell us a little bit more about the how, and then we'll be off and running, okay? There'll be a chance for questions as well as we go along. At certain times, we'll take your questions to find out what you're interested in as well. Great, thank you. First of all, I've got Julius sitting here. Julius, tell me your experience of being a customer of a bank. I'm about to pass you the mic.
Thank you very much, Mark. You know, we all go through challenges in the banking sector as persons with disabilities, and most of the time we find that it's because of the disability you have. And the moment you start transacting, that's when you realize the challenges that are there with the service, the product, and everything, how everything has been put together. As Enable, we have done a research with the Kenya Bankers Association in the past, and we involved all the big banking institutions in Kenya. And what we found out is that of the disability community, only 30% use banking services. And of the 30%, only 10% actually use the physical, the walk-in where you get to the teller and actually withdraw money or deposit your cash, or even get like banking facilities. And then it's actually a problem because of this 10%, only 3% use their digital assets, the banking digital assets. And what that does is that you can see how the number goes on like shrinking. It's like a pyramid, but in the reverse, because you're supposed to have persons with disabilities embracing the banking services. And Irene has talked about people being dependent on their family, their friends, and this is breach of privacy, because if I need someone else to transact on my behalf, you find that I am giving up my very sensitive information, like PIN, and that's how you get. Actually, it's very funny because once we start going deeper into this, you find even the people that you trust take advantage of you. And I remember a while back, we had an issue of some banks having persons with disabilities, especially visually impaired, sign a power of attorney to actually run their accounts. This is giving powers to what most of us, money is very sensitive. When you touch any topic on money, it's very sensitive. And this is one area where we need our own independence. I'll give you just a short story. I traveled last year, and I needed assistance, of course. I was traveling by myself. And the person who's giving me assistance, it's a foreign country, and he was like, "Are you giving me a tip?" I've been to the US before, so I knew I could give $5 to $10. That is the standard. But the guy goes like, a day like this, we are very busy. We take tips of $40 to $50. And I was like, "Do you have an ATM?" This is where you start seeing even challenges of the built environment, because the ATM machines, they're not accessible, right? So I need this guy to actually transact, put in my PIN, and from there, I have no control over what he does. And he went ahead and withdrew $50. This is a lot of money if you put in the Kenyan context. What am I saying? I'm saying even with the research that we did with KBA, we looked at the experience of persons with disabilities, with how they interact with physical environment, getting into the banks. Are they accessible? The digital environment, is it accessible? The websites. And you have the problem of, because now we have the mobile money, which is very big in Kenya. But there are other tools like the USSD, where you put like numbers to actually access the banking services, but they are not accessible as well. You get locked out if you're using a screen reader. And again, even for the products and services, they use very complicated language for persons with cognitive disabilities and even the neurodiverse. It's a problem to them. So how can we bring together accessibility components and make sure that the banking services that we offer, persons with disabilities are not locked out? Thank you, Mark.
That's great. Please show your appreciation if you recognize that story, because I don't think that's unusual, right? Palesa, you've got a different angle on this. Sorry, I'm just going to run past you guys. You've got a slightly different angle on this. Can we just hear your experience?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Palesa Musia. I was born with a condition called nystagmus, which is an involuntary movement of the eye that causes short sight. Now, as a result of the nystagmus, I was told I'll never drive my whole life, which was very devastating. So for a long time, I used the services of a driver at some point too. Story for another day. So when I went to buy my first car, I could afford to buy the car, but the bank would not give funding to a person that did not have a driver's license. Now, at the time, I was legally not allowed to drive in South Africa because I couldn't pass the visual test to get a driver's license. So when I went to the bank to get funding, even though I could afford to buy the car, because I didn't have a driver's license, they wouldn't give me funding. So 3 banks declined me. And I went to the fourth bank. This time I decided to go physically to the bank because it's easy to decline someone over the phone. And I explained the condition that I have, and they said it's not within their policies to give someone a driver's license, funding without a driver's license, vehicle finance. So then I said, but what if I was a person that was blind? And then they told me, similarly to what Julius is sharing, that people that are blind would buy a car under another person's name. So then I said, but what happens if that person dies? And then the bank says to me, yeah, but the process ends where we give the person funding. We don't know what happens beyond that. And I said, so you really can't help me? And they said, no, unfortunately, we haven't done it before and it's not in our policies. And I said, your policies are not written in stone. They can be amended to include people like me. And for the issue of you've never done it before, then start with me. And they did. So I was able, yes. So I was able to buy my first car under my name and put my driver's license as the driver that was driving for me. And every time I changed a driver, I never had to go back to the bank because it's the first transaction of buying the car. And then there's insurance. When you're insured, you insure the car, but the driver's license has to be the driver's license. So I had to fight that battle as well because they wanted me to add my driver as an additional driver and pay an additional cost. And I said, but I will never drive this car. So why should I pay an additional cost for an additional driver, whereas I'm not even driver one? And they also listened. So what I did is after ABSA had after the bank had allowed me to get the license, to get the funding, I realized that I was now only getting my vehicles from one bank because my second car and my third car, I had no option but to go to the bank that I knew accommodated me. So then I thought, no, man, other banks are offering a better interest rate. So then I went to the other banks and they tried to say, no, we don't do this. I said, but ABSA does. And then suddenly, the other banks started making the same exception. So it's important for people in the financial sector as a whole, not just banks, insurance, vehicle rental companies, to make sure that their rules don't discriminate against people that have conditions that we didn't choose. It's so unfortunate, we didn't choose them. Yeah, thank you.
It's a wonderful story, thank you. I think there's a couple of things there. The advocacy stuff that you're doing for self-advocacy is amazing. But the banks listened. I think it's important to put that in the story and say, when you did talk to people, they said, okay, we hadn't thought of that. And I suspect that's a real problem. Sorry. Get out of the way. I suspect that's a real problem for the banks, is that if you don't hear what the consumers want, then how do you know what to make the changes? So, Christine, if you could tell us a bit about what's happening in the Banking Association.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Christine Onyango, and I'm with the Kenya Bankers Association. Thank you very much for sharing your experiences, because sitting here as the umbrella body, sitting here as the umbrella body of banks, I can't say confidently that we've thought about situations like yours, regarding the buying a car, needing a driver's license, needing insurance. Those are real life situations that honestly I don't think have been processed. So we start this journey in 2016 when we realized that we have to be inclusive, right? So according to the 2019 Kenya Population and Housing Census, this might be news you already know, 2.2% of Kenyans live with some form of disability. Yet only 0.5% are integrated in the formal financial system. This disparity, it's not just a statistic. It actually represents a systematic challenge that demands deliberate and sustained action. So we started a roadmap for banks, and guided by the Central Bank of Kenya, we decided to run a program where we ask banks to tell us what they do for persons with disability. You mentioned that it's not really clear where it sits in the bank. That is the ultimate truth. So in the beginning, it was a mess. You send out the circular to banks and say, look, we need you to tell us where disability sits. It goes to the marketing people or the products. Does it go to marketing or products? Yeah. Does it go to risk and compliance? We didn't really know where it sat. For most banks, it ended up in marketing and customer service, which to me then doesn't really serve. Customer service, yes, but marketing just sells the services, right? The products. So still, it needed a team of people from different departments coming together, yeah, to assess the needs properly. So has progress been made? I have to say yes, and it seems like the reason I hesitate is because to you it might not be progress, but to us every little step counts. So first it was, can we come together and just do an inventory? Are we serving persons with disabilities? Are we really looking into this? Whether it's the physical aspect of ramps, whether it's the digital aspect, whether it's account opening forms, are they in Braille? Are our ATMs, do they have the voice reader? Do they have Braille on them so that, everybody can use the systems that we have? When we speak to the website, what are the colors we're using on the screen? And are we considering our persons with disabilities? So all those things. And banks have now adopted policies aiming at transforming their services and systems to be more inclusive. On the human resources front, we have at least 60% of banks that have been sensitized on their staff, that have sensitized their staff on disability etiquette. We still have a lot of work to do, and I think that being in sessions like this will help us come up with targeted capacity building on where the actual needs are, so we still have to work on that. We have trained 27.3% of our staff on the Kenyan Sign Language, and we came up with an innovation called the Deaf Elimu app, which is helping to bridge gaps with the deaf community. We actually have 100 trainers on there that work with the banks just to train, and the vocabulary now I think has extended to over 1,000, different words. Yeah, so it's still work in progress. Now, are bank staff all on the Deaf Elimu app? No, that's something that we need to push, I guess, from an industry perspective. When we look at employment, less than 1% of persons with disability have been employed, and that's a survey of 54.5%. So my stats are coming from a survey we did last year, yeah, on the findings of this roadmap that we had set out. So a few institutions have made strides, but for the most part, we still have a lot of work to do in that place. Representation is important because it allows the industry to design products and services informed by live experiences like your experiences. So even before we go, we start engaging in terms of setting up our banking halls. Most banks, especially the larger banks, have dedicated desks for persons with disability, but we need to train our staff. So I think for us, we were looking outward as engaging with persons with disability, but we need to bring it back home and first understand exactly what the needs are. Physical accessibility, this seems to be the easier part because everybody thinks the solution is a ramp. Yeah? So that's usually the first thing they tell you to do. We have installed a ramp in our banking halls. So it actually got to a point where I was saying, I do not want to hear anything about ramps. Tell me what else you're doing. Yeah? So desk level cashier services to improve service delivery has been done. But again, as I said, we need to look inward and train first because there's no point of having a desk if you cannot sign. You have to be able to engage the customer on the other side of the desk at the level, meet them at their level. So we have a lot of work there. Digital accessibility remains an area of concern. I love that story of the ATM experience. I actually love the stories shared here. And these are some of the things that, just from listening, I think we should have a session between the banking industry and persons with disability to understand the actual issues that they go through. So 13.8% of banks have updated their mobile and online platforms to meet accessibility standards. But that's a gap that really needs to be addressed because 13.5% is really small. Yeah? So inclusion also requires financial investment. 72.4% of banks allocate less than 10% of their corporate social investment to financial literacy with persons with disability. We have a lot of work to do there. Maybe if we saw this as a corporate social investment, budgets are usually good. I was once a banker, so I know. So we can actually use more of that to improve our inclusion. Yeah, because most banks say financial investment is heavy, which it is, but so we need to find a way to bridge that. So looking ahead, Kenya Bankers Association is working on a new roadmap that builds on the findings of the recently released Banking Industry Accessibility Report, which you can find on our website, yeah, kba.co.ke. And it clearly outlines steps that will help the industry deepen inclusion on physical infrastructure, digital platforms, human resources, because also the people hiring in banks need to understand what are the requirements when you're hiring a person with disability, and of course, corporate investment. So we're looking to be fully inclusive, which means every bank, every branch, every app, and every part of the bank should cover persons with disabilities to make it more inclusive. So in closing, sorry, I forgot my iPad, so I'm using paper. I commend Irene and her team, the organizers of this conference, for your continued leadership in this important area. Your commitment is very admirable because it will help shape a more just and equitable society. We as the banking sector will move forward and we have to do this differently. I came in here ready to brag about how we're trying and we're doing this and we're doing that. The truth is, we need to do more. So I accept the challenge. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. And I think it's great at the end as well that you're candid about saying you were going to come in and say one thing. As soon as you hear the experience of customers, I think it's very difficult to push back, right? So a couple of questions I've got about what you said. I think it's really interesting that you're doing surveys and asking the banks. And you said this challenge of finding where the responsibility lies. Do you feel there's any senior level, leadership level buy-in to this? Is that one of the biggest gaps? That's what we find, often the accessibility person is trying to work upwards and influence upwards and be heard. But where there's leadership that's listening, then change happens quicker in every instance. Do you have examples of banks that get this at leadership level and understand the value? Or is that still the next step?
So I agree with you that the problem is, so first of all, the way it works usually is when we send out a circular as industry and say, we want this to be an industry-led initiative, it starts from the top.
Right.
Then the top figures out who's supposed to run with this exercise. And that's where it gets murky.
Right.
Yeah, because, like I said, it ends up in customer service or marketing. But there are other elements to it. There's premises, who are the people that make sure ramps can be installed.
Yeah.
Then there's the operational aspect, the ones that make sure we'll have this dedicated desk with someone with the right experience sitting there and speaking to the person across from them. And then there's who runs the ATM? Still operations, right? How do you make your product friendly? So banks like UBA have come up with account opening forms in Braille. Yeah, right. I know that INM has their ATMs with the voice reader and Braille also, and there are several banks that do. Right. So it's baby steps, but it's happening. Yeah, it's just, I think when you hear the stories, let me rephrase that, I think we need to hear more of the stories and stop talking to ourselves. Because when we speak as an industry, we know we're doing things. But are we understanding what the priorities are and which area we need to start with.
Do you know, one of the things that makes me think, because we worked with HSBC Bank a long time, we worked at Barclays, all the UK banks we worked with at some point. One of the things we do for most of them is user research. That sounds to me like the bit that's not built into your process is if you're not listening to your customers, this particular customer in particular, right? Do you feel that that's a gap in general, or is it a gap just because of disability? Do your banks listen to customers? I assume they do. Is it just they're missing some voices?
I actually think they do. I know that in 2023, we held a capacity building in conjunction with Stanbic Bank for persons with disability, and it was amazing. And even at the end of it, the Stanbic Foundation came in and, came up with a program for persons with disabilities. So do banks listen? Yes, they're listening. But I think that we need, in the same way we offer capacity building for our customers, saying, here's what we're offering, or here's why you should talk to banks. Internally, we need to do the same. I think we still have a long way in terms of are we educating our internal customers, who are the bankers.
Well, and that general awareness raising, when Julia starts talking, you go, oh, cool, I never thought of that before.
Exactly.
It's that very simple level, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah.
And is there a way of making that systematic within the bank? Is that the next step, you think, in terms of your roadmap?
Yes.
That's what you're saying is the next step?
Yes, that's the next step.
And is there a way for organisations and individuals to be involved in that? Is that part of mixing in and working with the community and connecting in with, like Irene as an example?
Yeah.
Is that part of the roadmap as well?
Yes.
Cool. So people here could be encouraged that there is an opportunity for their voice to be heard.
Yes,
and that's
absolutely.
where the change can come from. Sorry? Okay. Sorry, didn't understand what I was told then.
So, yes, so we've done the initial roadmap just to understand, as banks, what have you done? Now we go to the next step of reaching the actual consumer and understanding the needs, and then come back and as an industry decide this is a priority. Yeah. So this is where we start.
Cool. And is there, the final question I'm going to ask is there, what I find as well is that it's okay coming to an event about accessibility. We all love talking about this all the time, but people from outside our community don't come to the accessibility stuff. Is there a way that we can start going to other people's events? Where's the obvious place we go and actually be in the room where the bankers are, right? How do you get into those networks? Is there a way, like the Banking Association, is that network? Is there a way that you can invite people in to be talking directly to the community, your community? These two groups crossing over. There are opportunities to speak at events or to hold workshops within events that you've already got your members at would seem like an opportunity to build that relationship in the opposite direction.
Yes, I think that even with persons with disability, we need to have a session between them and bankers. Yeah? Because if we can hear the kind of feedback we've had today, it's important. And that already sets the tone for, it's like an aha moment.
Yeah, yeah.
So here's an opportunity. Here's a product that we can put in place quickly.
Yeah. And customers who are waiting to be served, so they're ready to go.
Yes,
cool.
Exactly.
Great. So thank you very much. I know you have to rush off, so thank you so much, Christine. That was really interesting, and I certainly think it's interesting to hear that the Banking Association recognises both that this is a challenge, but it's also got a roadmap and is working its way towards it. So thank you very much for that. Very interesting. Cool. So I was just told something that I didn't understand. Is Diana still there? She said somebody's here. I don't know whether they want to speak. She's gone again. Okay, we'll carry on with my list. Corazon, do you want to come up? So we've also got a couple of other people here who are going to talk a little bit about their experience. Karen Mirioku. Hi, Karen. I'm going to pass you the mic. Tell us a little bit about your banking experience.
Wow. I'm going to speak generally as an autistic person and also include those with other neurodivergent disabilities. Well, I'll start that the banks actually are not recognizing the aspect of autism and other related disabilities. The fact that we as autistic people can be able to manage our accounts. You find that they just claim that, when you're trying to open an account on your own, now you have to add somebody who's your caregiver because the lack of trust is there. They don't think that you can be able to have your own bank account without their number. Because when we talk about attitudes, when we talk about the fact that family members have not accepted that, yeah, an autistic person or a neurodivergent person can be able to just open your own bank account or even be able to deposit or withdraw. So for me, I'll probably say my experience in banking has been rather a tiptoe, like a seesaw, in that most people may not understand autism or other, they may think that because you're autistic, you can't be able to bank, like deposit, you have to have somebody there or like a caregiver or a guardian because that preconceived attitudes. And then of course, I'll talk about the accessibility of the banks itself. You find that a lot of autistic and neurodivergent persons really struggle sensory-wise, like the lighting situation or even the social anxiety. Like I have some level of anxiety. Like now, like you just fear. Is it because I'm like crazy, you know? Yeah, the overload, the smells, the crowded people. To be more socially awkward, which I am. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm so sorry, guys. I'm kind of very socially awkward. But, and then, of course, the banking staff don't understand anything about autism. Yeah, they just don't understand anything about neurodiversity. That the fact that we can be able to make decisions on our own without having to involve anybody. They think that we cannot make decisions if we don't have a guardian with you. So, yeah. Yeah, and of course the accessibility is also concern. Like you don't have materials in easy read, like you have visuals or social cues, especially for those who are non-speaking. You find out that there are those who are non-speaking, who cannot communicate well. And of course there are no audio visuals or social, like that kind of like visuals to show you, okay, this is where you need to go, this is where you need to go. Like there's nothing. There's no visuals, nothing. So, yeah, that's banking for me as a neurodivergent in a nutshell. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. Really, really powerful. Thank you, Karen. Really good. And also here, Perpetual. Somebody, is Perpetual here? No? I've got a list here, so I'm just working to the list. And Simalumba? Yeah, hello.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Malumba from the beautiful country of Namibia, and I'm going to speak from the context of someone who's in the speaking space. So I speak, I train, and I consult on reframing disability as a competitive advantage. And my banking experience is one, it's very awkward because Namibia is in a space right now where many banks are involved in the startup ecosystem. So banks like First National Bank, Standard Bank, Bank Windhoek, they are taking SMEs and startups very seriously. Now, getting access to these spaces as a person with a disability, as an entrepreneur, is extremely difficult because you have conversations with them and they're like, as another panelist mentioned, our policy doesn't cater for this. So automatically, as an entrepreneur, you are discouraged from even participating in the banking ecosystem, even getting access to funding for projects or initiatives that you want to start. That's number one. Number two is I asked one of the leaders in the banking, of the central bank in our country, I asked him, are you guys aware of the power, of the value of the dollar of a person with a disability? And there was no answer for it. So I think when banks and financial institutions start to understand that there is value, intrinsic value, in the market, in the ecosystem of persons with disabilities, I think when we can have that conversation and start creating products and services that are accessible from the onset, from the design phase, I think it'll be much easier to implement instead of creating products without the customers in the room to even give feedback or insight, and then you have to go back and retrospectively make changes. So access to funding, access to financing, we have a long way to go as a country. We have a long way to go in terms of being more inclusive. There isn't direct policy that speaks to persons with disabilities. They don't have data that tracks our spending habits. That's another gap. So if you don't know how your customer is spending their money, you won't know how to best serve them. So yeah, that's a bit of my experience as an entrepreneur, and I hope we can take this conversation further. Thank you.
Thank you. That was yeah, fantastic. And a whole different angle, right, on the business they're missing out on, the business value, the business case, the why this should be top of the list. So, Carathon, I don't know whether that's too hard or difficult, but you've heard a lot of things the banks don't do. Can you tell us a bit about what you do and what you are working on? That would be really great.
Okay, thank you very much. So like you mentioned, my name is Corazon Kaman. I work with the Central Bank of Kenya. And I'm really honored, to be quite honest, to be part of this event. I think it's the first time Central Bank is being invited, if I'm not wrong. And I think it's long overdue. So thank you very much for sharing your experiences. It's really heartbreaking for me to learn what's happening on the ground and the challenges that people are going through because of their disabilities in terms of accessing financial services. And for me, the first thing I can say is that's a challenge to me, because as CBK, we're the regulator of the financial sector. So we need to ensure that customers, doesn't matter of which segment you're in, your status, all customers need to be served. They need to be able to access financial services. So just to go to what Central Bank of Kenya is doing and to add on to what my colleague from Kenya Bank has mentioned, for the first time, the 2024 FinAccess Household Survey had a specific module for people living with disabilities. So they were able to interview 925 people living with disabilities to be able to understand whether they're able to access formal financial services, whether they are financially healthy, and of course the numbers are not good. In terms of formal access to financial services, they are below the average, which is 84.8. The people living with disabilities are at 74%. Only 7% of them are financially healthy, meaning that they are able to, save for a rainy day, they're able to cushion themselves financially. That's a very low figure. So what currently the CBK is doing, we are championing a national financial inclusion strategy, 2025-2028. And this is basically a multi-stakeholder initiative whereby the National Treasury, Central Bank of Kenya, development partners, other financial regulators, we're coming together to have a collaborative and a more coordinated approach in terms of pushing the financial inclusion agenda. So what we're trying to achieve with this is to be able to ensure that we are advancing the financial inclusion goals or agenda for all Kenyans. Does not matter your status, the segment, demographic. We want to push this agenda to all Kenyans. And how this initiative is broken down, we have different pillars. So for pillar 6, we're looking at inclusive finance for the vulnerable groups: women, youth, people living with disabilities, forcefully displaced people, and MSMEs. So this is where we are plugging in the issue of how can we be able to support people living with disabilities. And how we're looking at it, we're going beyond access. I've had a lot of access. I've had the ramps, the braille, etc., anything that can make access be easy. We are also going to look at the usage. In as much as the banks and the telcos, so we're looking at the banks, also the mobile money operators. In as much as you're making these services accessible to this segment of people, are they using it? What's the uptake? Are you tailoring specific services and products for them? The lady from SA mentioned that she couldn't access a car loan. Yeah. So are we looking at insurance products, if it's a capital market, if it's the pension, etc., tailored specifically for people living with disabilities? Are you offering financial literacy programs to be able to help them to navigate these products? Someone also mentioned that the terms and conditions are complicated. They cannot be able to read and understand them. So are you able to tailor specific terms and conditions for this caliber of people? We're also looking at quality. Apart from access, usage, we're looking at quality. Again, do we have discriminations in terms of the quality of services? Because like someone mentioned, you'll find that already as you walk into the banking hall or, they have already profiled you. You're walking with a stick, you can't see well. So they've already profiled you, and are they discriminating you in terms of offering you, say, a loan or whatever service you require? Again, we are going to be looking at that because what you've seen is stereotyping will affect the quality of the products or service that they are going to offer. The last dimension you're going to look at is the impact. So if you mentioned that this loan should be able to uplift this person, is it doing so? And you also mentioned that data is key. I agree with you, because without data, we can't have policy or specific designed products. So we'll also be collecting data just to see whether these particular products and services are doing what they're supposed to do. So those 4 dimensions are the key things we're going to look at. And how we will do it, we're going to have some form of evaluation. We'll have the KPIs, and then we'll have targets that we keep tracking. And the bit about being a regulator is that sometimes you have to put the stick on the table. I think you asked, why aren't banks keen to be able to serve this segment of the population? But the beauty about us is sometimes when we feel that, say, banks or telcos are not pushing this agenda, we will go hard on them. There are repercussions if you don't adhere to whatever mandate you're trying to push. So that's what I can say about what CBK is currently doing. And I'm happy to have come here today because it's very timely. Actually, I had mentioned to Irene I'd be away this week, but I managed to just work around my logistics. We are having a workshop going through this document. So we're validating this document and just being able to see whether we've been able to capture the KPIs correctly, the targets correctly, the timelines correctly. And I think I'll have an offline discussion with her just to see how we can be able to loop in enable, just to be able to ensure that this pillar for the PWDs is correctly captured. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you. Okay to ask some questions. Yeah, okay. That was fantastic. Thank you. So there's a couple of points in there that I'm interested in sort of just extending a bit further. I'll start at the end about the stick that you've got. The carrot and the stick is like an eternal problem for people in accessibility. On the one hand, selling the business benefit. Hey, there's loads of customers over here that you're missing. That's a carrot, right? And it works with some. How does the stick sort of go down? How does that work with people that you're trying to connect in with? And do they feel the fear? do they see that there really is a repercussion here? Or are you beginning to sort of introduce them to the idea and you don't want to go too far? I mean, where is the stick in that conversation?
Okay, so thank you for that question. Normally what we do as central bank is we'll use moral suasion to be able to push an agenda. Because where we sit, we can see the pain points. Even just hearing what people are going through today, we can see there's a real problem. And you'll come up with policies, and normally we'll engage the stakeholders. We heavily engage stakeholders. We'll engage the banks, the telcos, the insurance sector, whichever sector that is required to be able to push the agenda. But sometimes it will reach a point whereby you'll see the telcos or the banks are focusing more on the commercial angle of some of these solutions, yeah? And that's where, as a regulator, you come in. And by the stick, I mean that we have enforceable measures like penalties, yeah? So you'll give them a directive and say that in the next 1 year, we would like you as a bank to be able to enforce this mandate. So after 1 year, we'll do a stock take and we'll ask, so in the last year, you were supposed to do ABCD, please demonstrate what you have done in this line. And if they're not able to demonstrate, then unfortunately, we can invoke a penalty, etc., depending on the severity of the measure. But what we're trying to do is not to forcefully push the agenda. We'll first have a moral suasion session and just talk to them, explain to them the public good, are you able to see the need, etc. But if that fails, then there's no other option than now to go with the stick.
I like that. I think that's very pragmatic as well, isn't it? That if we want your banking system to be accessible. We don't want to punish you. We actually want you to just put it right. We think you can do it.
Yeah.
Here's some things we want you to do. by the way, there's still a stick.
Yes.
And there's still a fine.
Yeah.
Another challenge I think that I've heard, and I don't know whether this is unfair, but I think banks sometimes prefer to pay a fine rather than fix things. Do you find that?
Yes, we've also experienced that. But what we've seen is that we are currently reviewing our penalties, actually.
Okay.
I don't know if you've been able to see, we put it out for public participation. But what we have seen is that, and also for the MNO, you'll find that a big player, a big telco like Safaricom, 1 million is nothing to them. They can violate something and they pay 1 million and they move on. But what we're currently doing, that we're reviewing our penalties, we're increasing based on the severity of the issue which they have committed. So going forward, they would rather just comply than pay the penalties. Because if you're penalizing someone 100 million Kenyan shilling, that's quite something. So we've actually considered that, and actually a very true observation that some banks would just, they opt to pay fines and continue their business the way it is. But we are actually very alive to that, and we are working on that. Yeah.
And we've mentioned a couple of times, sometimes it's not clear where the responsibility lies.
Yeah.
To what extent is it to do with risk? I think what I observe from working with banks over time is that banks are very risk averse by their nature.
Yeah.
So if there's a legal component to the risk, that they could be breaking the law and therefore there are fines, that feels like one of the most important elements that gets their attention. So that's the compliance team. Do you find that's your route in generally, or is there another part of the bank which is also alive to this and thinking about what they can do, whether it's in marketing or customer service? Or is it pretty much you start with risk and then you spread out from there?
Yeah, I agree with you. And like I mentioned earlier, the challenge we're also seeing is that the way the banks will perceive a person who's disabled, it's that the person is a risky client, yeah? So they would not want to deal with the person. They would want to avoid and would want to use any policy that they have against dealing with this particular client. But what we also need to do, and we've seen other jurisdictions like Bank of Ghana, we've seen Tanzania, they actually have regulations that are able to ensure that commercial banks and telcos are able to cater to the specific segment of the people who are living with disabilities. So the Central Bank of Kenya, I think our challenge is first to ensure that whatever we push to the commercial banks or the MNOs, it's enshrined in the law. Because once it's enshrined in the law, then there's no escaping it. Even if it's risky or not risky, it's neither here nor there. As long as it's in the law and you're required to do it, we've passed the regulations and we've said this is what we require you to do. And as long as we've passed the regulations, of course, we are cognizant to any other law that is touching on the regulations, and we've been able to clear that, then there's no other way. But I agree with you, it's a challenge whereby it's like a hot potato. Nobody wants to handle it. It comes to your desk, you want to push it to the next desk, it goes to your desk, you're trying to send it back to, to the other desk. So we need to find a way to just be able to house it properly. And I think if we are able to enshrine all this in law, it is easy. It is easy to be able to push it ahead.
And is that underway in Kenya?
Yes. So what we plan to do is once this strategy is out, one of the KPIs is that we need to have policies or strategies which are able to enforce some of these initiatives, yeah? So once this is out, I think in the next 2 months we'll have finalized on this document. It's going to be out. It's going to be launched by the Cabinet Secretary of Treasury. Once it's out, then now we start looking at how to be able to legally mandate some of these things. And one of the low-hanging fruits is the PWDs.
Right.
So it's something that you're thinking about, and they already have a framework to be able to work on, but you're waiting to first launch this strategy, which should be done in the next 3 months. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And one final question, because you've mentioned the phrase financial inclusion, which I think is really interesting to have disability as an element within that. Mm-hmm. What's the motivator for financial inclusion for the banks? Why would they be concerned about financial inclusion? Because that's another place it might land, I guess, in terms of finding a way in for the disability community.
So, like I mentioned to you earlier on, the commercial banks, in as much as they would want to look like they are uplifting people, uplifting lives, there's also a commercial aspect to it. It has to make commercial sense to it. And what I've seen is that with mobile money, there's competition now in terms of how can you be able to tap into the low-income people, yeah? So I think that is already a motivation for them to be able to tap on the lower-end segments, to be able to push the financial inclusion agenda to the underserved or the unserved. And we've seen a lot of micro products right now, commercial banks offering. They're talking about microloans, microinsurance, micro what, and it's targeting the low end income. And I think when Safaricom came in, they were really shaken up. So they've really woken up and they're actually having those small products and services targeting the low income. So the commercial banks will look at where it's untapped. We still have a huge deficit in terms of access to financial services, and that's where the focus is shifting right now. And in as much as it's an area which has been for the longest time perceived not to be making money, but it's a very commercially lucrative area. In as much as we have, say, mobile money, we have a lot of untapped potential in terms of just offering products and services to this kind of people. And maybe just to also add, what we've seen in the recent past is that from 2006, inclusion has come from 26, we're now at 84%. Okay. And in as much as it's the telco which is driving it, the banks have a very huge percentage in terms of just driving the inclusion. That's where we are seeing right now in Kenya.
Great, thank you. Well, a really powerful set of statistics as well. That's a huge number and change, and that partnership working as well, not just seeing the banks standing on their own.
Yes.
But ultimately the financial value for the banks in the market,
yeah,
seeing the products arrive in the marketplace that they need to compete with is really interesting. So, great, thank you. We have a special guest here. Thank you, Corazon. I'll come back in a second. I'll come back with some questions, but we have a special guest. If you could introduce yourself to the audience who can't see you.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Isaac Mora. I am a person with albinism. I am the government spokesman of the Republic of Kenya. Yes.
Do you have something to say about financial services?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think from what I was briefed to speak about today, I would want to say that this is an area that is very, very important to all of us who are working very hard to ensure that persons with disabilities are included, especially when it comes to the financial sector. And why so? Because persons with disabilities are also an economic segment of our society. I don't think the idea that people sometimes look at us and say, maybe we are just there to be helped is really true. Because when we increasingly have persons with disabilities participating in the economy, it follows, therefore, that also we do have opportunities also to do business with other people. And when you have a case in point is our currency. When I was a senator before, I was a member of the Senate of the Republic of Kenya, just in my previous posting, I was able to introduce a petition in the Senate to have the currency to be more friendly to persons with visual impairment, something that was taken up by Central Bank, and I'm happy that you are represented here. But then we had a challenge. Okay, what we did it in 4 ways. That is a physical currency. We had the size of the notes differentiated, so every other note is different from the other. We had the numbers enlarged, so you find the Kenyan's currency has very huge numbers. And then the color of the various notes also is different. And the number 4, there are some marks at the tail end, one of the ends there. So we have some bars. The first bar is for 50 bob. The second bar, like that. Unfortunately, though, we couldn't have those marks stronger because of the ATM specifications. Because it then required that we change all the ATMs in Kenya. And I remember struggling with the then central bank governor on that issue. So this is a challenge of inclusion because then it means that then when you are trying to modify, then you are coming too little too late, and then people start saying, oh, it's too costly. So it's therefore very important to have what we call the universal design, as many of us are aware, so that then preemptively, ab initioly, and then you are able to resolve it. Now, but let me go straight to maybe what may have been highlighted. So if I repeat, unfortunately I came a little bit late, forgive me. So we have the M-Pesa accessibility for the visually impaired, where of course Enable has done a very good job in ensuring that we have a good USSD interface. And also the company, because it's one of the best inclusive companies, has employed a lot of people with disabilities. It's good we blow their trumpet, even if they may have said it themselves. And training also their customer service agents. So we see that as a Fortune 500 company that is very inclusive. We also have Equity Bank, which has got accessible mobile banking app interface, also with tactile markings on their ATM. And of course, they have also sponsored entrepreneurship trainings for persons with disabilities. We have our agency, the National Council for Persons with Disabilities, of which I was privileged to be a pioneer board member, which is also helping people to get assistive devices and also digital literacy programs through various partnerships. For example, the issue of Inua Jamii cash transfer program to ensure that then persons with disabilities have some money, and of course they go to the bank to get their money or through the M-Pesa, through reasonable accommodation. We also have local startups like Assist All by Science Media. It's a TV station for those who are deaf. They have sign language there. And they have a very good real-time sign language interpretation services, helping the deaf community to navigate services, including banking. We also have Sasa Pay and other fintechs that have expressed interest in building inclusive fintech ecosystem. So that's an opportunity for innovators. Kenya is actually #1 in attracting startup capital. In 2023, we attracted $800 million. Last year, we had 638 million, the most funded in Africa. So that's an opportunity. CBK has spoken for themselves, but let me just repeat, if at all, for emphasis, in terms of the fin access surveys and the disaggregated data for PWDs, in terms of policy, inclusive digital financial services, and aligning with the Kenya Financial Inclusion Framework. We also have our Huduma centers and e-citizen services. Let me explain this a little bit for those who may not come from Kenya. Is that we have centers where you have government services. They are distributed across the country. You get all manner of services. But now we have digitized our services. Over 20,000 are now available online. So we are working to ensure that we are piloting, as the minister said when we were opening this conference, to ensure that all of these services are accessible and also using even SMS alert system. And we really want to recommend that we mandate WCAG compliance in all the DFS providers. We offer tax incentives to fintech companies that develop accessible solutions. We create a certification or rating system for accessibility in digital finance and promote partnership between the government, banks, telecoms, and DPOs or OPDs to co-design and co-create solutions when it comes to digital access. I thank you.
That's wonderful, thank you. Do you mind if I ask you a question? I'd love to know, when you're talking about your work in the PWDs and leading work prior to this work here and saying that you were a pioneering member of the board, how different do you think it is now than 10 or 15 years ago? Corazon, you said a number from 2006. There was something, did you say 20%, 26% then? Can you just reply? Because I think it's interesting to see how that has changed in policy terms as well. Just repeat the numbers, Corazon, and then we'll see.
In 2006, we were at 26%, and we are currently at 84.8 as at last year, 2024.
That's financial inclusion?
Yes.
And how do you classify that when you're measuring that? What does that mean?
So what that means is that currently 84.8% of Kenyans access some form of formal financial service. So we're talking about savings, we're talking about loans, we're talking about insurance, we're talking about pensions, we're talking about investment.
Yeah.
So all those are categorized as financial services. So 84.8 of adult population in Kenya have some form of access to this kind of services.
Yeah. So I was wondering whether, with your perspective from the PWP point of view, does it feel like that there's been a huge shift? Sorry, Isaac. There's, that those numbers are impressive, but maybe that doesn't reflect real life for people with disabilities, is what I was thinking.
Yeah. I think Kenya is one of the most non-monetary society globally. I think we are at, if you can correct me, it's 65 or 66% that we are using non-cash. But then the whole issue of adaptability when it comes to digital access is a challenge to those with disabilities, because first and foremost, of course, there's a whole issue of internet access, the ownership of smartphone. We can call this a smartphones generation. So there's a class divide there, and therefore a digital divide. Then there's a question of digital literacy, in that regard. And then, of course, then you come to the issue of adaptability. I think that's something that is work in progress. A lot has happened since 2006. We must give credit where it is due. That time, of course, even generally as a country, we were more mobile telephony. We not developed these platforms. But now we are seeing a lot of assistive technology, coming up. In fact, 2030, Kenya was a pioneer as a consequence of a Global Disability Summit that was held in London in 2018. And consequentially, we also had projects here that were looking, at the whole gamut of even issues to do with assistive devices. But I think the whole issue of now having fintech, having apps, it's really new. It's really new. I remember when we had a challenge before of having people, having apps. We were calling them, like, for example, ears on demand. So that then to connote the Kenya Sign Language. So I think there's improvement. We need to do a proper baseline, maybe to tell us where we are, so that we separate between abstraction and reality, and the extent to which then the people are here. We should also remember this is also tied to also the level of access to education in general. So it's buttressed by an enabler, education for all. So then how many persons with disabilities are in school? How many are graduating, in secondary, from primary to secondary schools to university? So really, we need, I think one of the key things that we can maybe recommend, and I think that's one of the things that I may have said in my closing remarks then, is that we do a proper baseline. But there is actually leadership in Kenya, looking at our private sector, looking at our central bank, in ensuring that then we leapfrog, our people with disabilities towards this digital economy. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. Thank you very much. So I'm just going to move on. There's a couple more people with lived experience that we're interested in, and then we'll come back around and talk about what the banks are doing as a final sort of piece of the jigsaw. I've got Hudson. Is Hudson in the room? Hudson. Hi there. If you could tell me who you are. Oh, sorry, you're speaking.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Hudson Asiema, and this is my name sign. And I'm the founder of, and also the software developer of Deaf Elimo Plus application. So I developed that banking app so that people can learn much about the bank. What does this assist? There's a communication barrier between the staff and the customers. So this trains them so that they can be able to interact with the customers very well. So let me talk about some few challenges that I've experienced, and also other deaf people are really much commented about. So service access. The most important barrier, the most biggest barrier that we receive is communication barrier. It's just a basic communication. What has been done before is the writing. But now the explanation about how the loan is taken or how people do the savings, the information is, let's say, minimal, not fair enough. And also, for example, when you talk about the apps, whenever I send someone who I did not intend to send maybe some amount, and I need to reverse it very fast, it's mostly based on calls. You need to call the service provider. And now to the deaf side, that's a challenge. For example, at night, if I get to send it to a wrong person, then it needs me to wait until tomorrow morning to go physically. But as compared to the hearing people, they just make it by just a phone call, and they receive their money reversed quickly. This is a challenge. Maybe in future, maybe we can change this, or on the communication part, maybe have interpreters even in the bank, or staffs who can be able to communicate in sign language and make a process which is very swift and fast. All right, the third, maybe also we're having business loans, and also we are having other loans, but it's really difficult also when it comes to the deaf people, because it has in-depth communication, and people don't tend to give this information deeply because it's very long. Now, whenever whenever a customer comes in and I'm the manager and I really want to communicate to this person who is deaf and wants maybe a business loan. For a hearing person, you find like they're exposed to questions and many questions. But now, when it's a deaf person, whenever they want to provide the loan, you find like there's the weaker part of the conversation because they're not asked these in-depth questions. You find like they're also limited on getting a certain amount of loan, and maybe this deaf person wants to get a huge loan to expand the business. So that's a challenge. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I think, again, just the insight on the number of different barriers that people may face in day-to-day living, just doing the day-to-day transactions that they want to do, brings that back to that story. Corazon, I just want to talk a little bit. We didn't talk very much about different disabilities that you may be considering. I guess that's part of the challenge. That we all know in the accessibility world there's 101 different barriers that people may face. How do you think that is understood within the work you're doing within financial inclusion, for example? Do you think it sort of tends to favour one area, or is there certain areas where you know that there are bits of hotspots or activity that are going on?
I think in our inclusion strategy, and like I mentioned, I'm going to talk to Irene, maybe we can be able to have someone who's specifically dealing with the PWDs, then they're able to shed more light, because we might not be able to appreciate the specific challenges of the different kind of disabilities. I've been able to learn today that, for example, someone who's deaf, they can't be able to understand fully the requirements of a loan, they can't be able to engage with the staff of the bank because communication is a barrier there. I've also come to learn that someone who has autism is having a challenge in terms of the perception which the bank staff are giving to them. So I think it would be important for us, because we might not really appreciate the unique challenges that the different people with the disabilities are having. It would be good for us to have someone who is very much in touch or in tune with the specific challenges and be able to have specific KPIs and specific targets for the different buckets of people living with disabilities. That would really help. And I would really appreciate just to have the practical scenarios, like he's mentioned reversals. I'd never thought of reversals, yeah? Just someone who's able to send money to the wrong number, they can't be able to reverse because of the challenges etc. Again, touching on the usage. Are you tailor-making your specific products and services to cater for the specific challenge that these people are having? So that's something very keen for us to be able to see. So I think for us, it would be good to have someone who's very much aware of the specific issues that the specific PWDs are facing, to be able to make it more quantifiable. Because what the document will do is to have KPIs and have them in a very measurable way, set targets, set a timeline. So at the end of, say, a year, we're able now to go back to the banks, to the mobile money operators, etc., and be able to have specific, targets. And probably there are some, maybe, I don't know, I could be wrong, maybe the people who cannot be able to see well, they're visually impaired, are having more of a challenge with mobile money because of USSD, I don't know. Maybe the deaf are having a bigger challenge, I don't know. But I think it's something which is doable and something which we are very much keen to see if we're able to have it very granular to be able to make it more effective. Because the issue, again, we have with policy is you can sit up there, make rosy policies, but now when it comes to implementation, we have a challenge. But when it's very, very quantifiable and very specific, I think it's easier. It's much easier to drive it.
That's really helpful. I think one thing you're making me think, in the UK, that when we're working with banks, I know this has increased the amount of work that we do. So we're like the enable in that conversation. We're the specialists in the disability. Is consumer duty, it's called. And what it requires is that the banks actually have to consider and listen to particular customers. So they don't come to AbilityNet to find out what a blind person thinks. They make sure they're listening to their customers, and they must listen to them. And that's a shift in the emphasis of saying, the people in the room can tell you what it is that your service isn't doing. You need to listen to them, because the flip side of it is that they encourage customers to make complaints, which sounds a bit odd, but that's the only way they find out that something's not working. Because the more you hear from customers saying, I tried to do this and it didn't work, and I think what we're hearing as well is that customers aren't being listened to. They raise a problem, but the bank doesn't know how to deal with it, or we don't have a policy. So maybe part of the shift is seeing this as a consumer problem, and within the legislation and thinking about how that's framed, asking the banks to listen to their customers better would bring these stories through from their own processes, and then they have to do something about them once they're raised as complaints. So that's just a thought that's slightly different to the way that that you were framing it, bringing the experts in. The experts are the customers. They know the problem that they've faced that day. They can describe it in detail, probably 1,000,000 times. So if you're listening to them, then you get some of that intelligence and feedback at that point. So.
Yeah, and I appreciate that perspective as well. But I think my point was from the strategy document, we are engaging multi-stakeholders.
Okay.
So from a stakeholder engagement perspective, it would be good to also appreciate the challenges which they know or they see or they, on the ground which the consumers are going through, to be able to also adapt their perspective in the document such that once we now start cascading it, it's a bit more specific. So we are able to actually now be able to push the specific agenda for the different categories of the PWDs.
Maybe I could add something and say that we now have a very robust legislation that recognizes the fact that we have to have digital inclusion. The Persons with Disabilities Act of 2025, which really has taken a lot of time since 2007 when we started reviewing it. I think there were 23 forms of legislations, even the ones that we are pushing in the parliament, but now it's a piece of legislation. Number two is that we are in the process this week, and possibly at latest next week, we are now reinstating disability mainstreaming indicator into the performance contracts of all ministries, departments, and agencies. Now, you'll ask the reason why that is important is that number one, that indicator helps us to ensure that all of the government agencies and ministries and departments have an obligation to employ persons with disabilities who are qualified. So then you have self-advocates in all of these ministries. Currently, Kenya has got about 1.45% of all the workforce in government being persons with disabilities. That's really a paltry number because we need at least 5% as per the provisions of the Constitution. But at the same time, we also want to ensure that we have a communication indicator in performance contracts so that then it has a sub-indicator on inclusive communication. That will also help in terms of policy development and all of that, over and above the whole issue within the main indicator of disability of accessibility. But also the government so far has got a pillar, it's called the digital superpower and the creative economy, where we are looking at ensuring that we leapfrog our country by having fiber connectivity across the country. So that resolves the issue of internet. We also have what we call Jitume hubs. Jitume is a Swahili word for like send yourself, like kind of self-help of sorts, where we have about 238 so far in 290 constituencies, only 52 remaining, but also the total number of the Jitume hubs are actually 274. So there are more, it's just that maybe in one constituency there may be more than one. And we have been able to train 693,000 young people, of which then we need also to disaggregate this data, and Irene, we can work with you, to ensure that we know how many of these are persons with disabilities, so that we know that I was very encouraged, for example, when I went to Masai National Polytechnic, and I found a young girl, very, very elegant. She was on a wheelchair. She was actually the student leader, and she was even the one who was showing us how, for example, she's making money out of doing graphic designs, designing posters for various events and the local church school and all of that, over and above doing her beadwork. And because she was being supported by an anchor, she was also, supplementing that support by getting some upkeep. So you can see the benefit of not just fintech, but also that digital accessibility in terms of digital jobs, digital jobs, online jobs, because then you don't require a lot of mobility, and that is quite friendly for those with physical disabilities or mobility disabilities, or mobility impairments, and also those who are visually impaired, and any type of disability anyway, because one of the challenges of the built environment is accessibility. So what am I trying to say? Yes, there's the issue of the interfacing between the bank and other service providers, and I'm very happy to meet Asiema here, who is a person who is deaf, and is the one who has created an app. I think let's clap for him. That's really wonderful, because it clearly shows that we are co-creating our own solutions towards a shared and a future that is more inclusive. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. I've been asked to speak.
Yes, hello. Good morning or good afternoon. My name is Bablin, And this is my sign name, and I'm using an interpreter to voice for me since I'm deaf. My question goes out to CBK representative. Yes, we know, and we have really talked about the service providers. There are situations whereby if I want to withdraw my money and I want to send it, or I feel like there's the burden of sending the money from equity, then putting it to my account, then sending it to another person. So maybe is there a way maybe the service providers could be able to assist us? Because whenever I try to, if, for example, I send money to the wrong person via the bank directly to the number, and I call the service provider will tend to tell me that that they're not responsible for that part. For example, if I call Safaricom, just to use an example, yes, they say that it's not their matter. Or if I call the bank, they say that they cannot handle that. Is there a way maybe for you to sort that situation? Because it happens at most time.
Sorry, maybe just some clarity on the question. The issue is if someone sends money from M-Pesa to the bank and it's erroneous, then they're trying to reverse it, or it's money coming from where to where?
From the bank, and I want to send it to a person, then we find maybe I put the number wrongly, it went to the wrong person, then I need a reversal. So it's from bank to M-Pesa.
Okay,
Yeah.
I get you. So it's from bank to a wrong M-Pesa number?
Yes, through the mobile banking, that is.
Okay, fine.
Yes.
I think I understand. So the challenge here, is it, maybe just for me to get more clarity, the challenge here, is it for a normal bank to a wrong M-Pesa number transaction, or specifically for PWDs? Is there a specific challenge for PWDs when sending money, or is it just any normal bank to a wrong M-Pesa? Because we have structures in which reversals take place. And for money to be sent to a wrong M-Pesa account, there has to be consent. And that's why there's normally that reversal, whereby you dial, I think it's that 444 hash. And the person who received the money has to consent that, yes, it's erroneous, then Safaricom is able to reverse the money. But then now I'm trying to understand, is it an issue with accessibility in terms of the specific app, how the PWD is able to access it, or is it a normal bank to a wrong M-Pesa? Those are two different issues.
Oh, yes, I do get to your question. Like for example, we have different banks, and I'm deaf, right? Whenever I do the wrong transaction, and maybe I'm using a bank or a mobile banking app, then I send it to a wrong person, then I asking like CBK, like since you're a financial institute that controls the financial institute, you're the main institute that controls all the financial institute, is there a solution for that? For example, if I send money and I go back to maybe a service provider, and maybe they can do it successfully, but for me, I being deaf, how can we sort it out and do it like?
Okay, I get you. And I think it goes back to the issue of usage. And I think he also expressed the challenge whereby if someone is deaf and they send money to a wrong person, there's a challenge in reversing that transaction because they don't have a specific, say, platform or channel for deaf people to report or to be able to communicate that money was sent to a wrong number. So it goes back to us ensuring that we have tailor-specific products and services for the different calibers of the PWDs. So if it's a deaf person, is there, say, a USSD which they can be able to dial, or is there another channel which they can be able to use to be able to communicate, I've sent money to the wrong person, and are you able to reverse? So in terms of our strategy, it's also one of the things we're looking out for. And under the usage dimension, we are trying to see whether we can be able to have both banks and telcos have specific products. Yeah, and it's not just for the banks. Also, like I mentioned, insurance, the investment, capital markets, etc. We're trying to see if we can be able to tailor make the products for the PWDs. I don't know if I've answered her. And I agree with her. I don't think it's something that has been thought through. I don't think we actually have actively used or launched products and services for the PWDs. And I think it's a challenge to us to be able to reinforce this message and to just push this agenda to our regulators to ensure that they're coming up with solutions that are catering to these particular segments. Have I answered her? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Great question. Okay, so we've got another 10 minutes or so. Pina, is that? I know that's not quite what you thought,
Gee,
but we're
thanks.
running a bit late. I'd like to introduce Pina, and one of the reasons that Pina's going to talk through is for any organisation, we've heard about the complexity, we've heard about the different challenges in listening to customers, we've heard about the challenges in what to do inside the organisation, whose responsibility it is. Pina, you've got a model, a maturity model, which I think is a way to address this on an organisational basis. So we're not going to dive that deep on it, obviously, but I think it would be interesting for people to understand what a maturity model is and what this particular one does, and also how that can apply to an organisation to begin to address some of these questions.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Mark. And thank you, everyone. I'm going to stand if that's okay. All right. So first of all, I want to congratulate everyone for all this hard work. It's a lot of work, and it's a complex piece of work. So thank you all, and thank you all for sharing your stories. Myself, as a person who acquired a disability while I was working at the bank, in a large bank, I kind of bring to the table the two sides. So the person who worked in IT in the bank across many different departments, understanding some of their challenges and how things kind of need to operate, and then coming in as a person with vision loss and trying to now adapt and use the services and products that sometimes were influenced by me before losing my sight. So you kind of reflect, right? And you go back and think about, oh my goodness, I didn't think about that. And you don't know until you actually walk in those shoes, right? I think it's really important. When we talk about consumers, I also wanted to point out very quickly, one of the things we learned, it's not just about the persons with disabilities that we know identify as people with disabilities, but it's also about our elders, for instance, who acquire a disability as they age. They're our customers too, and they don't see themselves as disabled people, but they do have challenges that are very similar to people with disabilities. So we have to think about that into the fold, right? So I'm going to the maturity model. Yes? The room is to my right. Perfect. No, I didn't. I wasn't, but thank you very much, Mark. Okay, so just to think, some of the things to think about. So we go back to what is a maturity model. Maturity model is a tool. It's a program that we use to help organizations, in this case we'll use banks, to understand exactly where they're starting, where they are. Because if you're going to do any change in your organization, you're going to realize that you need to figure out exactly where you're starting from. Then you need to plan for that change. You need to build the capacity, right? You need to sustain it, and then you need to grow from that sustainability. So the maturity model is a program that allows you to, one, kind of look at where are you within your organizations? Are you an organization that kind of responds to accessibility in a reactive mode, where you don't really have any documented processes, where there is no training, there's, or maybe just a little bit in certain pockets of your organizations, where, there may not be policies that really reflect the accessibility needs or standards. So that would be what we call a level 1 out of 5. Right? And I will tell you, I've spoken to a lot of businesses who say to me, I feel like I'm not even at a 0. And should I be ashamed that we're not even at a 0? And I say, as long as you get started, it doesn't matter where you are. So I think it's really important that we remember that. When we think about graduating from a level 1 to a level 2, as an example, the level 2 is where you really focus as an organization to build your capacity, to build your policies, to build your training. In many organizations, this is where they start thinking about roles and responsibilities, because everybody around and across your organization has a role to play in accessibility, including your third-party vendors, your partners, and so on. So you want to think about where are the roles and responsibilities? What are people supposed to be doing? If I'm creating digital content, I say, well, as a designer, I have this responsibility. As a developer, I have this. But when you think about the organization, you think about, okay, for an HR person, what's my responsibility when it comes to accessibility, and especially if we focus on digital accessibility? I think if you're HR people, the people who hire and do auditions for your talent, if they understand how the technology works or how the user uses that technology, it makes it a little easier when they're doing that audition, for instance, right? And it's about creating that awareness, those communication plans, making sure that the company, the bank has a commitment to accessibility, and they make that public. And when you make that public, you then become accountable to it, right? People are going to hold you accountable to it. We think about standards and policies in level 2. So level 2 is a lot of work, but because it's really your fundamentals, right? It's really your foundation. So what are your policies? Again, if we're thinking about digital, are you adopting standards like the EN 301 549, which is an international standard for digital, right? And how are you doing that? Do your folks have the training and the knowledge to actually make that happen within your organization? And what are the policies, right? So what are the policies that are going to support these standards? Because you could have a standard and tell people that this is what you want, but if the policy doesn't say that you have to use it, it's not going to happen, right? So the policies have to support the standards. The standards are supported by best practices. The best practices are supported by training and knowledge, right? So that's a level 2. So once you've got that set up and you're starting to really feel that you're building confidence within your organization, you move to what we call a level 3, which is basically your level where things are really starting to come together. You're starting to apply those practices systematically across your organizations. People are really starting to feel comfortable with what they need to do. They support one another, and they're starting to really see some changes in the culture within the organization. Right? So that's that defined stage where, where that sustainable stage where you sort of like, you want to be, that's that sweet spot where you want to be. Right? And this is really about making sure that what you've done in level 1 and level 2 is being sustained, right? It's every day, it's part of your operational systems, it's part of your customer training, it's part of your employee training, and so on and so forth, each and every time. And I'm trying to go through this quickly. So if you go to a level 4, so what does a level 4 mean? A level 4 is where you get to the point where you're collecting data. You're starting to really see the fruits of what you've been doing. You're collecting that data, which, by the way, you should do throughout the whole process. But as you get to that level 4, you're starting to really analyze that data, looking at the trends, what's failing, what's working well, how are you progressing? And as I mentioned, I think what was mentioned by our folks here, this is about progression. You're not going to get it right, and you're not going to get it completely all at once. But it is about, how do you progress from one level to the next? What is the data that you're collecting that informs you to do better? And what are some of the gaps that continue to exist, for instance, right? But you're starting to really be what we call a trailblazer within the industry. You're starting to really be comfortable, and you're sharing perhaps even within your own industry now with other banks and other financial institutions. And the level 5, which is the optimal level where everybody would love to be there someday, is where, as an industry, we're sharing now outside of our own industry. So we talked about before partners, right? We talk about, can we share this with manufacturers? Can we share this with other industries, that tourism and so many others that can help us get to the next level? So, in a nutshell, because I only have now 6 minutes, this is sort of what the maturity model is about. And really it helps you define a very detailed plan of action that allows you to track that progress and allows you to walk through that journey with some guidance and with some support. And through it all, you measure that progress. You recognize the success that your teams are doing, and you make sure that you track all the feedback, and the feedback comes from inside the bank as well as outside of your bank and your customers. Even with your third-party vendors, they too will have feedback. And you take that feedback to continue to grow and really separate yourself from the pack, as one would say, and show your leadership into this. This is not a complex model. In reality, we do this. We've done this many, many times. If we're introducing change in an organization. And what's really interesting about the maturity model is there are several of them, in the industry. Mark talked about the Ability Net one, which is the digital one. At the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, we have one. This is sort of based on what we have, but also this model can be applied at a specific topic level, like in this case we're looking at digital, but it can also be at the entire organizational level. So we can be applying this model when you're looking at facilities, for instance. You're looking at education. You can break it down so that it fits within that organization. And when you think about level 2, one of the things that we do suggest for level 2 is who is responsible to oversee the program. Do you have a portfolio manager, or do you have someone who is assigned to see the progress of the program end to end, right? And bring the stakeholders together. Accessibility cannot happen in isolation. Accessibility has to happen as a shared responsibility across the entire organization. It also has to happen across the entire industry. The International Accessibility Association also has a conference coming up in October this year called M-Enabling. And at M-Enabling, we also bring forward international banks, and we have this discussion around financial inclusion and fintech and where banks are going internationally and how they can help each other get to the next level. Because one of the things about banks that we're in this forum and talking about accessibility, but to be fair to banks and financial institutions, and your comment about risk aversion, in a world today where digital is prolific, it's everywhere, and it comes in many, many different formats and approaches, one of the areas the banks really have to be resilient about is fraud and anti-money laundering and all of these things that abuse people with disabilities at even a greater degree, right? So we have to be able to understand both sides of the story to sort of say, yes, we want to understand what the needs of persons with disabilities are. We want to make sure that we take that into consideration. We also want to make sure that we, as an industry, provide opportunities for people with disabilities to work in the industry in different roles and everything. But we also want to make sure that we have the processes, the policies, the checkpoints in place to make sure that we can reduce the amount of fraud that occurs in financial institutions. And so by making sure that accessibility is blended within all of your operations, it's also a priority, similarly to your privacy and your security requirements, then we can make sure that the user experience is improved and it's more inclusive and it's more accessible to everyone. That leaves me, what, 30 seconds?
Thank you, Pina.
Thank you.
That was great. Apologies for rushing through, but actually I think what you get there is that top-level view as well, that a maturity model is a tool for addressing where you are now. Senator mentioned about benchmarking and taking stock of where we are and making sure we've got decent data, and you've mentioned that as well, Corazon. You're using those numbers to set priorities. This is an organizational equivalent. Can I just ask how people would find that model? Is it on the International Association of Accessibility Professionals website?
It is. The International Association website has a link to the maturity model. You can also contact us directly and we can walk you through it. As you mentioned, we have it at an organizational level because we do full organization. We also do maturity models for universities as well, and colleges and so on in the education centers. So and we benchmark, to your point, we benchmark and compare. So one of the things that we like to do is benchmark, and we say, hey, you know, we've done this for X number of banks or X number of industries, and here's how you compare within your industry or within your bank. And I think that's really important because that gives you that, I think someone mentioned it earlier, that extra incentive, because you want to be better, right? You want to be above the average. So yes, reach out to us. We can guide you through it. We can support you through it and help you out. Absolutely.
Great, thank you. And as you mentioned, maturity model is a tool. So those of you in the room who are wondering how to bring this into your organization, that's one thing. But also people who are outside looking in at how banks can work. Think about where you fit into the picture in terms of being a consumer, having an influence on what they do and what they choose to do, because that's where the change will come from, and that's part of the whole picture that we're talking about here, isn't it?
Yeah, and they've been around for a long time. They used to be called a little bit differently. We called them capability maturity metrics, back to CMIs, right? So as you know, these are business practices that we use all the time, but we tend to not think of them when it comes under the accessibility lens, but they work really remarkably well. Right?
Yeah, I can only stress that this is an area where I think people in accessibility as well can influence their organization. Take it back into your organization and ask, how can we look at this maturity model? Within AbilityNet, I did a lot of work on ours several years ago. It tends to be the accessibility person that we talk to, so because they're interested in accessibility and they don't know where to take it internally. We had that question about whose job it was anyway. But once you start the ball rolling, once you start talking to the compliance team, once you start talking to the marketing team, once you start benchmarking and showing how other banks are performing and use data to show there are gaps here that need to be filled, it starts to make it more practical for people as well, because this is an unknown subject for them. And so this is a really powerful tool, I think, to go back into your organization, engage with the people around you, your stakeholders, the people you don't know that you don't know yet, that you've got to get to know to make this happen. Procurement is another one. We haven't said that word yet. I'm surprised we haven't said it. If you've bought the systems and they're not accessible, your procurement team's not going to be happy when they find out that you've got to buy another one. So those are the sorts of questions this will raise, and they'll give you a systematic way of addressing them.
Yeah. It basically distills, right? Distills the process in management, in manageable tasks, right? And procurement, yeah, Mark, you're absolutely correct, falls in this particular model will fall early on in level 2, because you want to make sure your vendors, your people that you're doing business with, understand that you want to buy accessible products, that there are clauses within your contracts that they will be held accountable for, right? So that's a very important, and that's very powerful. That's a very powerful tool.
Well, it echoes what the Senator was saying about the public procurement policies and the processes that they require to have quotas and other things in terms of purchases. Great. Well, it's 1:20. Must be very close to lunch for all of us. Thank you so much, Corazon. Thank you so much, Senator Pina, and everyone else who spoke. It's fantastic having this blend of lived experience, the bank saying we need to listen. Okay, let's start that listening process. Let's get in a room together. Some of these problems can be solved quickly. Some of them are going to be harder to fix and take longer. But at the end of that is a customer who's happy with your service. And that's what everybody wants. That's what every organization wants to have, is happy customers, happy, loyal customers telling their friends that this bank did this for me is the prize here, right? And that's just good for business. It's good for the consumer. It's good for the country and all the other elements around it in terms of finances. So I think really positive to go out there and try and get your voices heard, have the banks listen as well, find those relationships and build them together. So thank you to all of our speakers and everybody who's contributed, and thank you for listening to us here today. Thank you.